always remember to breathe. It's pretty important. What is going on today, guys? So today we are back with another video. Today we're actually going to be looking into a king in his own right. Today we're actually going to be taking a look at Lucario, who is fighting and steel typing. Lucario actually maxes out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 2,703 CP, which is actually pretty decent. You could actually probably do a really nice Ultra League build with Lucario here. But of course, to get into the Great League, we do want a 1 on attack, 15 defense, 15 stamina at 20.5 here to hit that 1494, which does allow us to stay underneath that 1500, but also give us a really high stat product to boot as well. Now, according to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have ran in the Freestyle Cup, just everything in the Great League basically, out of the 548 uniquely typed Pokemon, Lucario actually ranks 383rd in bulk and 287th in stat product. So honestly, we're kind of like middle of the road on both of those. Pretty bad on the bulk, further down than the middle of the road there, but hey, it's definitely not all up to that. A lot of this does come from our moves here that make up what a great Pokemon can actually be. But of course, all this does come from our base stats here at 236 on attack, 144 defense, and a 172 in stamina. Now, looking at our moves, so not much has changed for Lucario in the last couple of months, but still a huge powerhouse. I actually don't even feel like we need to go through most of these moves here, just because, I mean, counter definitely makes way more sense than bullet punch. We get an extra damage per turn before stab. We get an extra 1.2 damage after stab there, so counter definitely makes more sense. Same energy per turn on both of those, so literally losing nothing by using counter there. And then in the charge move areas, power up punch is of course the mean machine, as it always is. Only 35 energy, 40 damage, raise your own attack. I mean, it's insanely good. And I mean, Shadow Ball, even though it's not a stab move, it's still our next fastest move. Has some good coverage with it, hits really hard. I mean, there's just not any other way to really look at Lucario and say, holy cow, that's way better. So, I mean, you definitely do have options to run Flash Cannon or Close Combat. I could see possibly like Flash Cannon working out decently in the Boulder Cup. I could see Close Combat actually working out pretty good in the Boulder Cup. In the Kingdom Cup, I'd probably stick to Shadow Ball for a lot of the neutral damage. In the Nightmare Cup, possibly Shadow Ball could be used to help cover the Psychics, which would be nice. Close Combat could possibly help against the Darks. Flash Cannon, not as much there. And then in Season 1 Regionals, I mean, basically any way you build the Lucario, it's going to have some type of leg to stand on, but I definitely think that Shadow Ball and Power Up Punch definitely do work better there as well. So, looking at all those moves, I definitely want to convey counter, Shadow Ball, Power Up Punch will be the moveset that we go with for our Lucario today. And the reason that we're actually not picking through each one of those moves like we normally do is because this time we actually have 4 cups to get through. And to try to keep this video around the 20-minute mark, we're actually going to just kind of scoot right on through that. Lucario is actually going to be available in 4 cups during the Mirror Cup month. During the month of August. We're actually going to be able to choose Lucario in the Boulder Cup, the Kingdom Cup, the Nightmare Cup, and Season 1 Regionals. So he has a lot of chances to shine here. And of course, we're actually going to take a look at our shielding scenarios to figure out where he actually shines the brightest. So starting in the Boulder League, of course, we do have our counter, Power Up Punch, Shadow Ball moveset here. In the 0 vs 0, we actually start out with a 37.5, beating Magneton, Bastiodon, Steelix, Bronzong, Torterra, and Magneton there. So some pretty notable wins there. A lot of those make a lot of sense. I mean, Melmetal, Bastiodon, Steelix, Bronzong, Torterra not quite as much, but Magneton all have some sort of tie to at least some type of weakness that we have. Bronzong is going to be weak to Shadow Ball if I can remember that correctly, but he's not actually going to be weak to the fighting type damage because it does carry the psychic typing, so kind of an awkward matchup, but we still end up doing really well up against it. Torterra is the kind of awkward one, but because we do carry that steel typing, we do have a decent chance up against Torterra, pending that it doesn't get off any type of ground type moves. So As long as we have our 0 versus 0 shield situation, we should do really well up against those. Next on our 1 versus 0, we actually bump up to a whopping 81.3%, only losing to Poliwrath, Whiscash, and Toxicroak. So Toxicroak's the interesting one there. Even when we have an entire shield up, Toxicroak can still end up beating us, which is always really interesting. That's why I'm a huge fan of Toxicroak all around. Next, in our 0 versus 1, we actually go down to a whopping 18.8% this time. Still winning though up against Torterra, Melmetal, and Magneton. So those are the ones that we really want to focus on inside of the Boulder Cup. Those are the great matchups that we have. Even if they have an extra shield up on us, we still do really well up against those Pokemon. Lastly, in the Boulder Cup, we do end up with our 1 versus 1, which is a clean 50% here, only losing to Swampert, Marshtomp, Gallade, Poliwrath, Whiscash, Toxicroak, and Medicham. So, some interesting ones there to say the least. Poliwrath, you can see, actually remains a loss whether they have a shield or not, so kind of interesting there. And of course, Medicham is the one that, you know, everybody kind of goes after, which is unfortunate that we still lose to it, but totally understandable there. So averaging out all 4 of those shield scenarios, we actually end up with a 46.9%. So keep that in your head for just a second as we go through these next 3 cups. Our Kingdom Cup that we're moving on to here, actually gonna stick with Counter Power Punch Shadow Ball, just like we said. In our 0 versus 0, we actually start out with a 52.9%, losing up against Flygon, Blaziken, Torkoal, Charizard, Frostlass, Altaria, and Alolan Marowak. So Alolan Marowak, if you do remember back in the Kingdom Cup, was kind of that oddball. If you were able to get a Shadow Ball off up against the Alolan Marowak, then of course it's going to be toast. Otherwise, it is going to resist a ton of the damage that you're spouting out at it, so it's kind of one of those awkward matchups. Next, we move into our 1 versus 0, which is a 94.1%. Holy cow, that's huge. We only have 1 loss here, which is Blaziken. So Blaziken definitely can end up giving us a run for our money in this 1 versus 0 shield situation, so that's pretty standard. I mean, we all knew that back in the day. Blaziken was a really good check for Lucario. Next, we move into our 0 versus 1, which is a 23.5%, winning up against Probopass, Empoleon, Melmetal, and Dragonair though. Those are some pretty standard wins. Probopass gonna have some weakness. Empoleon should still have some weakness if I'm remembering correctly. Melmetal definitely gonna have some weakness, and Dragonair. Unfortunately, Dragonair, even though it has that super fast Aqua Tail, it's not gonna be able to spout out enough damage to us, so still doing pretty good. Last but not least, in the Kingdom Cup, we do move into our 1 versus 1, which is a 64.7%, losing only to Torkoal, Charizard, Blaziken, and Alolan Marowak there. So, as you can see, Alolan Marowak showing up in 2 of those 4, so Alolan Marowak is kind of that oddball that we really have to look out for in the Kingdom Cup. But, I mean, if you guys remember it all in the Kingdom Cup, Lucario was the king. It's basically Lucario, Bastiodon, and I personally think that Altaria was a 3rd king for sure, and probably even Lapras could be the 4th king. Now I'm just spouting off all the kings. Anyways, averaging out across all 4 of those shield situations, we do have a 58.8%, so super high there. Remember that number as we keep going here. We're going to come back to that. Nightmare Cup, of course, we're going to be running Counter Power Punch Shadow Ball yet again. We're going to start out in our 0 versus 0, which is a 41.2 this time, winning up against Alolan Raticate, Claydol, Hypno, Bronzong, Umbreon, Alolan Muck, and Drapion. So if you can remember in the Nightmare Cup, it was kind of like that whole rock, paper, scissors amongst the 3 typings. And being that we have a really interesting typing ourselves, we have a ton of resistances here, and we're definitely able to take over a lot of the dark types, of course, with our fighting type moves, but we're also able to resist a little bit of the confusion user damage, and we're also able to just basically take neutral damage from that. Because we do carry fighting, but we carry steel, we actually end up having a neutral matchup there, so it helps us out a lot in a lot of those confusion user matchups that were such a big deal back in the Nightmare Cup. Next, we move into our 1 versus 0, which is a 76.5, only losing to Hitmonchan, Poliwrath, Toxicroak, and Gardevoir now, which is quite interesting. So, back in the Nightmare Cup, it was pretty widely accepted that Lucario kind of got knocked off of his throne from the Kingdom Cup because all of the other fighting types in the Cup could basically take on Lucario pretty well, and you can see that really shows up here. Hitmonchan, Poliwrath, Toxicroak, I mean, those were like the big fighters in that cup anyways, so definitely good to see that we still have some checks in line for Lucario. Next, in our 0 versus 1, we actually end up with a 23.1% here, winning up against Alolan Raticate, Umbreon, Alolan Muck, and Drapion. So the Alolan Muck and Drapion are kind of awkward because they do have Dark Poison. They are only going to have a weakness to the ground type moves, but at least our neutral damage can push through and actually end up taking those as wins. Alolan Raticate and Umbreon both going to be weak to the fighting type damage, so counter's just going to pretty much tear through them. Last but not least, we do end with our 1 versus 1 in the Nightmare Cup with a 47.1% here, only losing to Alolan Raichu, Claydol, Hypno, Xatu, Hitmonchan, Poliwrath, Toxicroak, and Gardevoir. So Gardevoir is definitely showing up here. Now that it actually has Charm, it's actually showing up pretty nice. That it's even taking games on Lucario here, which is pretty crazy. So averaging out the entire Nightmare Cup, all 4 of those shield situations, we actually end with a 46.97. So really close to our Boulder Cup, which was a 46.9. But like I said, keep that in mind here as we go over our last cup, which is actually the Season 1 Regionals. Starting out with a 0 versus 0, we actually have a 43.5% win ratio here with Melmetal, Bastiodon, Steelix, Bronzong, Umbreon, Fortress, Alola Mug, Venusaur, Sableye, and Magneton actually finishing out our wins there. So in the Season 1 Regionals, of course, there were, quite a few Pokemon that could show up and be inside of the meta, and most of these make quite a bit of sense. Melmetal, Bastiodon, Steelix, all going to carry that Steel typing, which is a weakness. Umbreon also going to be in that category. Magneton going to be in that category as well. Then we do have Bronzong, which is going to be neutral damage for us. Fortress, which is neutral damage, if I'm not mistaken there. And then Alolan Muck, neutral. Venusaur's pretty neutral. And then Sableye, also pretty neutral there. So, I mean, most of those make sense. We do have an insanely high amount of damage output as is. So even if we're doing neutral, we can probably still outpace a lot of Pokemon, which is why we have all of those in our win column there. Next, we have the 1 versus 0 here, which is a 91.3% win ratio, only losing to Azumarill and Whiscash, actually, which is great to see. I love my boy Whiscash, one of the good old mud boys. So those two make quite a bit of sense. I mean, Azumarill, kind of an awkward one. It would really help in the Azumarill matchup is if we possibly had some Steel type moves, I guess. But even then, I don't really think that's super prevalent because doesn't water resist the Steel damage? Moving on to our 0 versus 1 here, we actually end up with a 17.4%. So winning up against Umbreon, Alola Muck, Melmetal, and Magneton. Definitely those are going to be our targets for the cup here, considering that they have a shield up on us and we can still end up beating them. Umbreon makes complete sense. Alola Muck, while it's still neutral damage, it is great to at least beat it. And then Melmetal and Magneton both, of course, are going to be super effective damage to those, so those are pretty clean. Last but not least in our Season 1 Regionals here, our 1 versus 1 shield scenario ends up at a 60.9%, only losing to Venusaur, Sableye, Charizard, Whiscash, Alolan Marowak, Medicham, and Haunter. So Haunter was one of the interesting picks that a lot of people kind of gravitated towards because Haunter resists so much of that fighting damage from Medicham, and it actually ends up bringing a pretty interesting matchup with Lucario as well, being one of our hardest losses in that 1 versus 1 though, so definitely interesting to see. Now averaging out all the way across all of those Season 1 regional shield situations, a 53.15%. So if we rank these in order, it should be the Boulder Cup is actually our worst performer at a 46.9. Then we move on to our Nightmare Cup at a 46.97, so just barely better than the Boulder Cup. And then we move into the Season 1 Regionals at a 53.15, and lastly in the Kingdom Cup as a 58.8. So our Kingdom Cup is definitely going to be the best one that we should perform the best with Lucario. But, I mean, all 4 of these cups have really outstanding numbers, and by the same logic that I've been using so far this month, it's a complete yes to all 4 of these cups. I think Lucario in the right situations will excel very well across all 4 of these cups here. The Boulder Cup, quite amazing. You do have a couple of things to watch out for, like Poliwrath, Whiscash, Toxicroak there, kind of some issues, but still you do really well up against most of those. And the Nightmare Cup is is still kind of awkward against most of the other fighters as well in there, but now we have that added Gardevoir threat, which is kind of interesting. And then from there, I mean, you're basically a king in the Kingdom Cup, of course. And then in Season 1 Regionals, we actually, you know, still end up doing really well, only having super big problems up against Azumarill and Whiscash in the shield up situation where we have an extra shield. They still end up beating us. So, I mean, that's still pretty awesome. And then in the Kingdom Cup, I mean, we're still king there. We've always been a king in the Kingdom Cup, so definitely interesting to see Lucario making its way through most of these cups and doing really, really well. I definitely would recommend you check out Lucario in all 4 of these cups. No matter which one of these cups you're participating in this month, Lucario is definitely viable in all 4 cups. So that is actually going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. We actually don't really have much to talk about today. I will show you what we've got coming up on the board. If I'm not mistaken, I want to say it was Bastiodon, which is going to be a great one because we get to go over Bastiodon in the Boulder Cup, so I'm kind of excited for that. But until then, that will actually be it for today. I'll go ahead and show those ending credits for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you could do that, but if you don't, you could be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below about the video. I do highly appreciate you guys watching. If you guys want to support me in any way, there are several links down in the description for Patreon, joining the community here on YouTube, or even just directly PayPal if that's your thing. I greatly appreciate everyone's name that's on screen, as you guys have showed some sort of support outside of just viewing the videos, and I thank you guys. You don't understand from the bottom of my heart. So until our next video, guys, I will catch you then.